Joseph Conservative Talk Radio, WOCA 11 a.m. Fridays, 96.3 and 1370 a.m.
Ever said, what's happened to the work ethic? Does anyone care about doing a good job? Shepherd November, local author, will be Adam's guest on Tuesday, May 26 at 8:35 a.m. to tell us about his series of 4 books that address just that subject. From his own experiences in the automotive industry and other fields, you will hear his take on the problem. That's the 26th at 8:35 a.m. One man's take on the demise of the pride in the workforce. Monday, the 25th, is Memorial Day, a federal holiday for honoring and mourning the military personnel who have died while serving in the United States Armed Forces. The folks at the Voice of South Marin encourage you to take time to reflect on the great sacrifices made by our military and their families. It's really true. America is still the land of the free because of the brave. The Voice of South Marin honors their memory and asks God to bless America.
Hey, folks, get your ears on for this week's super deals at Bob Wine's Camellia Gardens. Straight from this week's big ad, you'll find boxwoods just $3.99, frostproof gardenia also $3.99. Same for African iris and Laura pedalum, all just $3.99. For $2.99, take your pick. Bush daisy, southern charm azalea, variegated pittosporum, and much, much more. Of course, everybody's favorite ever-blooming red ruffle azaleas, still the history-making low price of $3.99. Don't miss out on this spring's biggest crepe myrtle sale. Take your pick from a dozen or so different colors, big number 4 sides, and blooming right now, just $24.99. Everything else for your yard or garden, call in your order. We'll deliver curbside. And come early to beat the crowds. Bob Wine's Camellia Garden, Southeast 38th Street, open daily till 4:30 in the same blooming place since 1952.
Help prevent the spread of germs. Wash your hands with soap and hot water for at least 20 seconds and always wash before you touch your face, eat, or drink. Use hand sanitizers. Limit sharing of eating utensils. Practice social distancing and avoid physical contact. Sneeze or cough into a tissue or the inside of your elbow. Avoid contact with ill individuals. An ounce of prevention is worth a ton of cure. Download the free booklet at Scientology.org/stay well.
WOCA.
Ocala. Today and tomorrow, partly sunny with a thunderstorm and spots in the afternoon. High today 90 to 95. High tomorrow 88 to 94. Sunday, cloudy with a thunderstorm and spots. High 86 to 92. Monday, clouds and sun with a shower or thunderstorm in the afternoon. High 86 to 90. Tuesday, some sunshine followed by clouds with a shower or thunderstorm. High 86 to 90. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm Brian May.
This is Jan from Palm Garden. Now that our governor is slowly reopening our state, the number one question I get is, when can I visit my loved one at Palm Garden? The quick answer is that I don't know. I can tell you that we were the first to close and will likely be the last to reopen in order to protect our residents. Limiting visitors, screening, and masks will also be likely. Until we are able to see you again, we are Palm Garden.
Hey everyone, it's time to learn more about the exciting opportunities in higher education provided right here at home. Wednesday, May 27th at 10:05 a.m., representatives from the College of Central Florida and Webster University will be my in-studio guests to tell us about the latest news about the education opportunities available right now. So be sure to listen. Again, that's Higher Education Happenings Wednesday, May 27th at 10:05 a.m. Education is the passport to the future. Tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. WOCA, the source.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, the source.
listening to AM Ocala Live, WOCA, The Source, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. Welcome back, everybody. AM Ocala Live, I'm your host, Adam McEwen. As we just wrapped up there at the top of the 9 o'clock hour from the centers, Mr. Steve Blank and Police Chief Greg Graham and Clyde talking about some important information within the community that has kind of made its way to the shadows in the background, but them trying to bring it to the forefront and make people just aware, and for those who may be going through a tumultuous time of their own, all about the opioid epidemic and how it's sort of impacting our community, but having options. And that's why we had Police Chief in, is to let those folks know that with the centers working together, that people have options. Just by going to the front doors of the police department, you have the opportunity to let them know that you would need help, and then with the help of the centers, just like it did for Clyde, to let you get back to a normal life and beyond the reach of the epidemic of the opioids. It's good information, and we're glad to have them in here, like we said, and that segment went very, very well. But as we're moving on for this Friday, to keep things a little bit more light now, as we can do our segment here, which everybody's starting to like, is the On This Day in History, as we take a look back on May 22nd, of some things that happened in history on this day. So we're going to go back to 1928, and we're going to go as far as 2010. We always kind of stop short about 10 years ago or so. It's hard to want to pull up history on this date from anything too fresh, but nonetheless, 1928 to 2010 is where we're headed, and a little shout out to Tish there for getting this going for us with these little pieces of factual history that she gets for us there. So a little shout out to her as we take a look and we step into it here on this day, May 22nd, back in 1928. It was the, it was the Yukon Pocahontas mine disaster, an explosion in the #1 mine at Yukon Pocahontas in West Virginia that had left 17 dead. This follows a series of mine disasters in the last few days, including 15 at a mine in Kentucky, and the large loss of life, over 150 dead in Mather in Pennsylvania. That was back in 1928 on this date that an explosion in the #1 mine in West Virginia, the Yukon Pocahontas, that took 17 lives. I was on this date, 1928. Moving on to 1933, on May 22nd, 1933, the Federal Emergency Relief Fund. The Federal Emergency Relief Fund has given 8 states a total of $5,336,317 in relief funding today to pay for welfare programs, including Texas and Washington State. And obviously with that tumultuous time of back then, coming out of or within the thick of the Great Depression, as the government forwarding ideas and plans, coming away with the Federal Emergency Relief Fund, and given 8 states over a total of $5.3 million. And that's huge back in 1933. And I guess when you relate that to certain things that we know we've done with the COVID-19 and the world pandemic, when you talk about the billion and trillion dollar stimulus and idea of getting us the money that was necessary through the pandemic here, we just look at the dollar amounts and, think about $5.3 million back in 1933. And here we are in 2020, and we're talking billions and trillions. It's just kind of fascinating in its own sense. But moving on, 1933 to 1945. On this date in 1945, Winston Churchill resigned as the Prime Minister of England, which brings an end to the coalition cabinet formed during World War II, as Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was a British politician, army officer, and writer. He was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1940 up until 1945. He led the country to victory in the Second World War, and again from October 1951 to 1955. Apart from 2 years between October 1922 and 1924, Churchill was a member of Parliament and represented a total of 5 constituencies ideology and an economic liberal and imperialist. He was for most of his career a member of the Conservative Party as leader from October 1940 to 1955. He was a member of the Liberal Party from 1904 to 1924. Of mixed English and American parentage, Churchill was born in Oxfordshire to a wealthy aristocratic family. He joined the British Army in 1895, saw action in British India and the Anglo-Sudan War, Second Boer War, gaining fame as a war correspondent and writing books upon his campaign. Elected for Member of Parliament in 1900 and initially as a Conservative, he defected to the Liberals in 1904, if you can believe that, and Churchill served as President of the Board of Trade, Home Security, and First Lord of Admiralty. Incredible. As out of the office during the 1930s, Churchill took the lead in calling for British rearmament to counter the growing threat of militarism in Nazi Germany, the outbreak of the Second World War, as he was reappointed First Lord of the Admiralty. In 1940, he became Prime Minister, and it was on this day in 1945 that he resigned as Prime Minister and brought an end to the coalition cabinet. So that's a little bit there as we take a look at Sir Winston Churchill. And it was on this day in history that he relinquished his duties as resigned from Prime Minister. Moving on, as we go to 1958, it was in 1958 that the U.S. missile explosions, a powerful Nike missile blew up underground in Middleton, New Jersey, which set up a further 8, which exploded, causing between 7 and 10 deaths. All missiles were fully armed with explosions that are explosives. That one's a little interesting here as I went to kind of look that one up as a little bit interesting, as I wanted to hear more details on it. As take just a moment there. And yeah, it's the Nike Ajax, the United States Army's surface-to-air missile is what it was. Interesting. As a powerful Nike missile blew up underground in Middleton, New Jersey, which set up a further 8, which exploded, causing 7 and 10 deaths on this day in history in 1958 of the Nike missile. Moving on, though, to a little lighter note, it was in 1969 on this day. We talked a little bit about when it launched, and it was special on this day that the Apollo 10, precursor to Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, landing and walking on the moon in July in Apollo 11. Apollo 10 astronauts, Colonel Thomas Stafford and Commander Eugene Cernan, carrying out a rehearsal for a planned moon landing when their lunar module came within 8 nautical miles of the moon's surface. As it was today that it was within those 8 miles. This was May 1969 human spaceflight, the fourth crewed mission in the United States Apollo program, and the second, after Apollo 8, to orbit the moon. It was the F mission, a dress rehearsal for the first moon landing, testing all the components and procedures just short of actually landing. Astronauts, like we said, Thomas Stafford and Gene Cernan flew the Apollo lunar module today to a descent of 8.4 nautical miles from the lunar surface, and the point where powered descent for landing would begin after orbiting the moon 31 times. 31 times it orbited the moon. Apollo 10 returned safely to Earth, and its success enabled the first actual landing, like we said, in Apollo 11 2 months later. Now, Apollo 10, this is kind of cool, as Apollo 10 set the record for the highest speed attained by a crewed vehicle, which happened on the 26th of May in 1969. Get this, 39,897 kilometers per hour, or what was 24,791 miles per hour, as it was during its return to the moon. Absolutely incredible. The mission's call signs were named were the names of Peanuts characters Charlie Brown and Snoopy, who became Apollo 10's semi-official mascots. Peanuts creator Charles Shorts also drew mission-related artwork for NASA, if you can believe that. Just incredible. As they note some crew notes, Apollo 10 and Apollo 11 were the only Apollo missions whose crew were all veterans of spaceflight, as Thomas Stafford had flown on Gemini 6 and Gemini 9, John W. Young, who had flown on Gemini 3 and Gemini 10, and Eugene A. Cernan, who had flown with a Stafford on Gemini 9, which is important, is knowing that these guys are part of the Gemini program, and having done it already, like we said, laid the groundwork for what became Apollo 11, for them, the actual landing on the moon. But Apollo 10, what has to get to 11 comes through 10, as it was the dress rehearsal, and it was on this day in history that they came just 8 miles from the lunar surface as the little dress rehearsal, like we said. And in a way, that's you're probably proud of that moment. If you're one of those guys, you're proud of that moment, and you're also like so close yet so far away from actually doing what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did. Probably looking at it going, man, just 8 more miles. Let's do it. 8 more miles. Come on, give it to me. But anyway, that's what happened on this day in history in 1969. Moving on to 1972, as it was in 1972, President Richard Nixon visits the Soviet Union. As President Richard Nixon, first U.S. president to visit Moscow, arrives for talks with Soviet leaders over, quote, international issues, including the war in Vietnam and the current nuclear arms race. During his week-long visit, a treaty to halt the nuclear arms race, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT, was agreed, which limits the two superpowers to only 200 defensive nuclear missiles each. That's pretty interesting. As they named it SALT. SALT. Sally Salt. The world's worst keyboard I got in here there, Joe. World's worst keyboard. Nonetheless, as that was in 1972 with Richard Nixon, which is pretty incredible when you think actually visiting Moscow, and the first president to visit Moscow with talks to Soviet leaders over international issues. As we move all the way up to 2009, with On This Day in History, it was on this day in history that Washington State, in 2009, Washington State starts assisted suicide. It was 2009. A woman in the United States state of Washington became the first person to die under an assisted suicide law in the state. The 66-year-old woman named Linda Fleming was terminally ill with pancreatic cancer and then died under the supervision of her doctor with her family by her side, which is absolutely incredible. And I didn't know much about that, and then seeing this here, I just had remember growing up with everything with the controversy between something like this and Dr. Jack Kevorkian and all that crazy stuff. But it was in 2009, on this date, that with the Washington State's assisted suicide with a woman, 66-year-old woman named Linda Fleming, terminally ill with pancreatic cancer, passed away under the supervision of her doctor with the assisted suicide with her family by her side. Incredible. Incredible. In 2010, as we move on here just a little bit, this one's pretty interesting here, as we know of people who set out to climb Everest, and it's one of those things now where it's kind of been brought up a little bit within the media, and there's been some documentaries about just how over the top it is now to climb Mount Everest, as we know, being the highest mountain in the world is one of those things, though, that it's very dangerous to do, but at the same time, so many more people are doing it, and so forth, that it's become its own little controversy, and just how much impact humans have in that area now with trying to do these excursions. But nonetheless, to the mention of this one, in 2010, not just for somebody who's conditioned and in their 20s or 30s to do this climb to the top of Everest. It was in 2010 that this boy becomes the youngest ever to climb Everest. In 2010, Jordan Romero, a 13-year-old boy from the United States, became the youngest person ever to climb Mount Everest. The boy set out with his father and 3 Sherpas from Kathmandu and traveled to the Chinese side of the mountain, where there are no age restrictions for climbers. Romero had already scaled 5 of the highest peaks on 7 continents, adding Everest as his 6th to his resume. Incredible. It says an American mountain climber is 13 years old when he reached the summit of Mount Everest. He was accompanied by his father, his stepmother, and 3 Sherpas. And the previous record for the youngest to climb Everest was held by Ming Kipa of Nepal, who was 15 years old when she reached the summit on May 22nd in 2003. Upon successfully hiking the Vinson Massif in December of 2011 at the age of 15 years, 5 months, 12 days, Romero became the youngest in the world to complete 7 summits. That's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. The mountains that this guy has climbed, this Jordan Romero, amongst Mount Everest, it was in 2006 that he climbed Kilimanjaro. 2007, Mount Kazuko in Australia, Kasusukoso, it's hard to pronounce. Denali in Alaska in the United States in June of 2008. Mount Everest in May, like we said, on this day in 2010. And get this, in Antarctica in December of 2011, Vinson Massif in Antarctica. Now, mind you, Kilimanjaro with an elevation of 19,000 feet. The one we mentioned in Australia that I couldn't pronounce, 7,000. Okay. Denali, 20,320 feet in elevation. And as you move through and through here, Mount Everest at 29,029 feet. Absolutely incredible. He's also climbed mountain peaks within the United States, as high as we said with Alaska and Denali, 20,320 feet in elevation. And Kings Peak in Utah, 13,000. So an incredible, absolutely incredible resume there for scaling mountains. Most people use mountains as an analogy for something they've got to get over to achieve something great. This guy just does it literally. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. That'll do it for On This Day in History. Stay tuned when we come back. We got some more to talk about. Our phone lines will be open, 622-9622. WOCA, The Source, WOCA Ocala, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. Back after this.
I'm Chris Foster. Joe Biden beats President Trump in a new Fox News survey of registered voters.
The new poll gives Democrat Joe Biden a 48 to 40% edge over President Trump if the election were held today. But that lead is with 11% still undecided. The president edges Biden on handling the economy, but Biden